Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. This time we're going to take a look at the recent secondary market trends for the Nintendo 64. And at the time of this filming, we're currently in early March of 2022, and so we're still reeling from the pandemic effects that I talked about in the PS1 market trends video. Prices continue to rise for all systems, making it a challenge for physical game collectors to know when it's the right time to buy and actually sell as prices fluctuate. Speculation about where the pricing for these retro games are headed continues to swirl as there's still a pandemic, albeit hopefully winding down, inflation, and a massive spike in the amount of collectors, all contributing to the unknown. Our best weapon to help combat this market volatility is to look at the current and historical data to uncover where the best value sits within the wonderful game library of the Nintendo 64. Let's jump in. Once again, let's travel back to January of 2020 as our starting point, just before the pandemic when prices really began to soar. While the N64 has seen some healthy market growth since mid-2012, things take a drastic turn between January and February of 2020. At that time, the average price for a loose Nintendo 64 game was around $18 to $19. The scope of which spans the entire collection, including some skewing from the N64 test cartridge and the international version of Yoshi's Story driving the price up. If we jump to today, which still includes that same domain, the average price of a loose Nintendo 64 cart is between $34 and $35, an 85% increase over the pre-pandemic pricing. However, like we saw with the PS1, it's not always a great representation to show just the library averages, as the truly rare games see the biggest changes, not only in percentages, but also in the raw prices, of course, too. Let's take a look at some of the heavy hitters for the N64 library to understand how these fared amongst the price increases. A loose copy of the blockbuster exclusive Sculptor's Cut version of ClayFighters went on average for $390 in January of 2020. Woof, no small chunk of change, but given the exclusivity and the rarity of this version, this somewhat average 2D fighter is understandably hard to come by.
Torch strike! Torches of fury!
That's not to say this is a bad game, but it's your garden variety in the fighting games genre of its time, and it doesn't seem to hold up all that well, at least to me. I think it's all that clay animation stuff that was so prevalent in the 90s.
ClayFighter! Punch and kick and they do tricks. ClayFighter!
Today though, this rare creature rings the bell of the library, commanding a staggering loose price of $1,153, a 200% increase over the same 2-year time period. Let's take a look at another heavy hitter though to compare.
Come to kill! Burn, baby, burn! Burn, baby, burn!
Released the same year for the 64 as the GameCube launched in North America, Super Bowling, a mediocre sports title, quietly hit shelves in small numbers. Its rarity really taking hold by 2016. Prices for this one continued to rise ever since, with a $338 price tag in January of 2020. The game is what you'd expect of a bowling game, at least until Wii Bowling would come out years later and show us how it's done. It uses some nice, bright colors, and I suppose if you couldn't make it to a real bowling alley and didn't own a Wii, this could scratch an itch if ever you had one for bowling. Today, that scratch will cost you $775, a 129% increase, well above the 85% increase we saw across the entire library. Let's keep going. Stunt Racer has an interesting past of price fluctuations that date back well before the pandemic, rising and falling as it seems to attempt to figure out its place in the secondary market. In January, though, a loose cart went on average for $214. This is another Blockbuster rental exclusive, so finding a copy has always been harder than most games. In this case, it's a shame. It's a good game as far as racing games go, and it reminds me a bit of the formula that SSX series used to blend emphasis on speed and tricks. Earning money and upgrading existing vehicles or purchasing new one feels satisfying here, and happy to report it's fun in addition to just being rare. Today, a copy will run you $390, an 82% increase over the January 2020 pricing. It did peak though in May of 2021 at over $500, and has been on the decline ever since. If you're collecting for the N64, this is definitely a title to be monitoring, as I truly think it's undervalued at the present time, and likely to swing back up, so this might be the right time to jump in if you've been waiting. Moving on to Castlevania: Legacy of Darkness, the follow-up sequel to the first 3D Castlevania entry, simply titled Castlevania. In January of 2020, you could pick this game up for roughly $60. While the first game is often targeted as one of the worst the series has to offer, the sequel's popularity has really begun to grow despite it sharing the same engine and look and feel as its predecessor. Thankfully, they've cleaned up some of the issues with the camera and the game's frame rate this time around. These niceties today though are going to cost you though, as the current pricing now hovers around $150, which is about a 150% increase to the January pricing. Conker's Bad Fur Day likely needs no introduction, as it's been sought after since the game's release, and it's already started to demand a premium price in 2012 onwards.
There's something real neat inside this barn. I can't quite see it myself. Unless, of course, some guy's jumping around stinking a horse poo's real neat. Which, of course, it isn't.
This is pretty neat.
This mature-oriented platformer will remind folks of Banjo-Kazooie, but stars Conker as its protagonist, featuring stronger language and themes, scarcely seen on a Nintendo platform.
Were your parents related, like before they were married?
Right, that's it. Oz is gonna give you a whooping. Here we go.
In January of 2020, we saw a dip to $58.50 in its average loose pricing. Since Bad Fur Day was released in the later end of Nintendo 64's lifecycle, there's a fair share of gamers who missed out on this delightful title. While some of the jokes have dulled with age, the gameplay and overall story remain a cult classic, and for many years was the go-to example of expensive N64 titles. Today, this game is around $125, a 114% increase. Its price still fluctuates quite a bit, and if you've not yet added this game to your collection, watch out for its next dip and confidently proceed. Conker's Bad Fur Day will continue to creep up in value over time. Let's not talk about a Nintendo console without mentioning at least one game featuring its mainstay mascot, Mario. There's a lot to pick from, but since one of my favorite genres is RPGs, let's check out Paper Mario, the once much anticipated follow-up to Super Mario RPG. In January of 2020, a loose copy of Paper Mario went on average for $45.67. While this sequel falls short of its Squaresoft and Nintendo collaborative predecessor, this great entry into the series introduced a whole new generation to the RPG genre, and it debuted its now iconic paper character stylings that remain with the series. Today, Paper Mario goes on average for about $85, and it's an 85% increase, matching the library's average. It's interesting to compare how the different systems' libraries are aging. The PS1 and the N64 were released relatively close together, only a year separating, and while the N64 saw a bigger percentage increase on average, 85% over the PS1 66%, we saw a much bigger spike in the specific PS1 titles, creating a larger disparity over its entire library. Like we did with the PS1 market review, let's take a look at some of the still approachable games for the Nintendo 64 that aren't about to break the bank, either at or under the current reported average. Okay, the first game up on our list here is Perfect Dark. When GoldenEye came out for the 64 in 1997, I didn't think it was possible to escape its sphere of influence. There always seemed to be a GoldenEye gathering or tournament that seemed to push the game's popularity ever higher. So when Rare, the developer and publisher behind the GoldenEye juggernaut, announced a spiritual successor, they definitely had gamers' attention. Like GoldenEye, you control the protagonist in first-person view, completing objective-based levels and taking down impeding enemies along the way. Moving away from the Bond IP, a new original series was born, with Joanna Dark at its helm. The game did very well financially, and it seemed to recapture a lot of its predecessor. While I'll always prefer GoldenEye the best, this is a great follow-up, and better yet, only $16.99 on average today. If you've not yet added this to collection, it's a great time to consider doing so.
What the hell?
Get out, Joe! The levels are too high! Use the cam spy!
Understood.
Okay, the next game on our list is Wave Race. Where are my racing fans out there? This second entry into the Wave Race series really blew people out of the water when early images for it started to surface ahead of the N64 launch. Of course, some of its interest came from simply breaking the mold of racing games by putting players in the water and on a jet ski, but there's more to it than just the uniqueness of the vehicles. The tracks are brilliantly designed, and the difficulty scales so well. The graphics were highly impressive for its day, and anytime I pop this game in, I'm instantly transported back to 1996. had a sequel for the GameCube that fell short of expectations, but for the N64, this is likely my favorite racing game, though Diddy Kong Racing is certainly up there. You might think, what's so special here, if you've not played this before? And it's definitely bringing some charm here that just makes it a must-own. Thankfully, it's only $13.99 on average, and one to keep your eye out if it's missing from your collection.
You finished first and got 7 points. Great race.
Okay, moving on with our list, we have Blast Corps. Another game from Rare makes the list with this critically acclaimed and high-selling title. In Blast Corps, destruction is the name of the game, and you use a variety of vehicles to destroy various buildings, attempting to clear the path for a nuclear missile carrier. And apparently they don't make these things with brakes, a serious oversight if ever there was one.
You're just trying to impress me.
The difficulty ramps up well as you progress through the game, always staying within the fun zone, even if at times you need to redo various levels multiple times before you eventually complete it. This may look a little simplistic today, and that's fair, but it's still very enjoyable and there's lots of gameplay here to drive the value up, especially considering it goes on average for only $16.38 today. Okay, next up on the list is Robotron 64. Here's one that might surprise a few folks, but this twin-stick style shooter raises the bar from its arcade predecessor, Robotron 2084. It still retains the amazing pick-up-and-play origin, so while it looks like there's a lot of chaos on the screen, it's actually super easy to jump in. Moving with the analog stick, you leverage the C buttons to shoot in their respective directions from the camera's perspective. There's over 200 levels of ever-increasing difficulty as Techno blasts high energy and intensity as each stage ups the ante. It's mindless and repetitive, but dang if it's not incredibly addicting and fun. Each level is an adrenaline hit as more and more enemies, each one stronger than the one before it, chase you to the corners of the map. Its graphics weren't anything to write home about, but it doesn't matter. The gameplay is superb, and once you start, you'll be hooked. Hours of fun in the small, average price tag of $17.99. Last up on our list, Pilot Wings 64. From intense shooter action to serene flying simulation, the Pilot Wings series returns in true 3D in this N64 launch title follow-up to the exclusive Mode 7 Super Nintendo original. You take control of a pilot of your choice as you aim to complete various objectives. Different events will require the use of different flying apparatus. There's a hang glider, rocket pack, or my favorite, miniature plane thing. While this is definitely more laid back, it's not easy to earn gold or perfect medals. However, it is motivating to keep redoing stages to earn a higher mark. There's some unfortunate slowdown, which actually seems to be isolated to the hang gliding, so it's unclear if it's the wind effect, but outside of that, it's impressive, especially considering that this is a launch title. It's a great example from the N64 library, and what's best, you can pick up a loose copy for only $18. And there you have it, a recent review of where the secondary market sits with the Nintendo 64. Unlike the PS1, the 64's library is significantly smaller, so it's a bit easier to stay up to date with individual titles. There were a few surprises in reviewing recent prices here. For those collectors looking to finish up their own collection or have their eye out on specific games, now's the time to dial in so you're ready. All that said, I know there's so many great and affordable games, or games that are trending cheaper that we just didn't have time to cover. Let me know what I all missed in the comments down below, and I look forward to monitoring the trends with you all as time goes on. In the meantime, thank you for watching Retro Ranger.